Thank you for being here today. Thank you for starting that recording, Sierra. So we're the goal for today, or the the goal for today in terms of this topic is to support you by introducing concepts of social and emotional intelligence in hopes that this will assist you with enhancing your leadership, effectively managing challenges, and building highly effective teams. In terms of the agenda for today, again, a bit different than our typical Leaders Institute workshops. Sierra, will you go to the next slide? We're in the welcome and opening remarks portion, and in just a moment, we're going to move on to the workshop presentation. We are not going to have breakout groups this time. Sayori has some other activities planned for you today. We will, if time allows, hopefully have some Q&A. So if as questions come up for you, feel free to put them in the chat, and then Megan and I will be gathering those for the Q&A portion. If there's something that is a clarifying question, there's something that Sayori said that you didn't quite understand, or there's something on a slide that you have a question about, put that in the chat and give us a heads up that this is a clarifying question. And then that'll notify Megan and me that that's something that we're going to tell Sierra. Oh, wait, can you stop for a second? Somebody has a question specifically about what you're talking about right now. Can you clarify? So once we have the workshop, and there will be a brief 5-minute break, we'll debrief, we'll get your feedback. We'd like to get your feedback live, and then we'll have an evaluation link to hear more. Want to make sure that you know that the link to the participant manual is in the chat. So if you're having any trouble with that, then let us know in the chat and we'll try to help you troubleshoot. And with that, we're going to get started with the content of this workshop. So get ready to answer some polling questions. We want to know a bit about you and how you're coming in to the space right now. So our first question is, what leadership challenges are you facing right now? And you can pick more than one. Communication challenges, challenges around budget and resources, personnel, performance, politics, management, just like general management, general leadership challenges. Again, you can choose more than one. You are likely to have multiple challenges or stressors happening right now in your leadership role. So let us know. And then the other question, how stressed are you on a scale from 1 to 10? 1, very relaxed. Everything's going great, super relaxed. All the way up to 5, very, very stressed out. And anything in the middle. This isn't a reflection of your dedication or your skills as a leader, just an indication of, in this moment right now, how stressed are you feeling? Very, not very, somewhere in the middle. Sierra, how are we doing in terms of responses? Have we heard from most folks?
It looks like we have about 84% participated. So if you want to wait just a second or more, it keeps going on.
And
We're at 87 now.
okay, so just a few more moments to let us know. And this is anonymous. We can't see who's saying what. So please let us know what leadership challenges you're facing and how stressed you are. A few more seconds, and then we're going to end the poll. Oh no, someone with a technical difficulty that it Zoom's not letting you interact with the poll. I don't know what that's about. Thank you for letting us know though so that we can research that. Okay. All right, Sierra, will you end the poll and share the results? And Sayori, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Oh, and Sayori, I'm just realizing that I did not introduce you. I'm so sorry. Our presenter for today, Sayori Baldwin, and then Sayori, will you let people know more about you as you move into the workshop content?
Absolutely. I want to make sure everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So if we move to the next slide. Okay. So first of all, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Academy for this opportunity to talk about not only a timely, but an important and for some reason, an underestimated topic. That's leadership grounded in social and emotional intelligence, especially in times like these when the uncertainty has been the new normal. I think about your programs and I think about, the budget uncertainty. And it's so important that as leaders, you remained grounded. I think this morning, the technological challenges that was faced. Um, so I spoke to, I think it was Don or was it Megan on the phone, and I am stressing out. Like I gotta be logged in. Um, and I can feel my hands starting to shake. And then finally, I just had to take a step back and just tell myself, Sayori, get your brain online and ground yourself. But also, with the academy being on the phone, I can hear them listen to my panic. And someone asked, Sayori, do you need to take a moment to figure this out? And so to me, that really is what leadership is all about, is how we communicate with one another. And in times of adversity or challenges, how do we pay attention to our physiological responses, but how do we stay grounded and communicate effectively? We could have all panicked and said, hey, let's cancel this morning because things are not going right. We could have panicked and not been efficient with our time. For me, this was just leadership at its best. And for me, leadership isn't just about having the right answers, it's about creating the right conditions for not only yourself, but for your employees to feel supported, safe, and inspired to move forward, even when the path ahead isn't always clear. So, what a great opening exercise. So, a little bit about myself. Before I retired in 2023 from Riverside County after 35 years of successful service, I was the assistant CEO responsible for our human services programs, and that included all Department of Social Services. That included your adult protective services, in-home supportive services, public authority, the Office of Aging, veteran services, child support, homelessness, and housing workforce solutions. In that role, I was responsible for a little over 5,500 employees, and my budget was $1.5 billion. Dollars. Think about your own organizational chart. And anytime you work within a team, emotions are going to be amplified. Anytime you work on a project, perspectives are going to differ. We need these different perspectives. The main initiative that I oversaw at the time was the building of our county's integrated services delivery system, which I was very passionate about, and I knew relationships were key to gain buy-in. We also unfortunately had a critical incident that drew national attention, which resulted in over 200 recommendations. I was challenged every day. As a leader, when you are faced with adversity or challenges, do you show up with clarity, focus, and intention? And do you influence others to make positive decisions? Can you click forward, please? So I will tell you that today I was supposed to control the slideshow, and I have a number of clicks, so I don't want to mean to be a distraction. So can you just go ahead and click 6 times, and we'll just get to this slide. Okay, so what my research says, um, and what we're going to talk about today is leadership success and the correlation with emotional intelligence, how your brain and emotions impact how you lead and influence others. Multiple intelligence, EQ, IQ, and personality. I'm also going to discuss the neuroscience of high performing teams, psychological safety, and a model that will serve as a reminder to understand triggers and behaviors. We're going to talk about the components of social and emotional intelligence. But most importantly, as we interact today, I would love for you to start building your own leadership, social, emotional intelligence profile. Click forward, please.
Sayori, do you want us to leave the poll up or would you like us to stop sharing those poll results?
You can, but I'm going to need your help, Don, because I'm on the phone and I'm not able to see those poll results. So I'm going to ask you to give the top five in a couple of minutes, if that will
Okay,
work for you. Okay.
sure.
Okay. So if you all can see this slide, if you can take a minute to look at this slide. And when I retired, this is what my daily world looked like. And I can only imagine this is also what your world looks like. On top of these daily tasks specific to your programs, we are standing at a demographic crossroads in our communities. The population of older adults is growing rapidly. It is expected by 2040, the number of elderly in California will increase by 59%. I truly understand the programs that you all face in your program today and in the future. Your programs are expected to do more with less, budgets are tight, resources such as affordable housing and transportation are limited, staff is a revolving door. Your technology can use a serious upgrade, and the demand for services continues to increase. On top of that, we first heard of the term the Great Resignation during COVID. The Great Resignation was not just about a rejection of work, it was a demand for better work. Employees, particularly the younger generations, are not leaving because they no longer want to contribute. They leave because they want greater flexibility to continue in ways that align with who they are and who they want to become. I will have to tell you all, I'm still old school. And when we first started talking about this concept of the great resignation, my whole thing is give me a break, come to work and do your job. However, I understood the importance of engagement and the correlation of employee retention, and I wanted to be the best leader I could be. I knew I needed to adjust my approach. This did not mean compromising standards. And if there was any way that we could allow flexibility while keeping the customer at the forefront, we have to be open. Now that I've thoroughly depressed you with all of these challenges your program faces, I want to thank you for being here, for being committed to a growth mindset and being committed to being the best leader that you can be. What I know to be true about the programs with your program and the limited resources that you face is that you all have not only led with what you don't have, but what you value. So if I looked at all of my departments in the past, your programs have been the least funded. However, your demand for services have been great, and you all have had no choice but to innovate. So as we face these budget times, I would suggest that the other programs look to you to determine what were some of the things you all did, particularly with your partnerships with other departments in order to serve other counties. So I bow down to you all for being innovative. So with that said, according to the poll, you all listed as your top challenges. And Don, if you can help me out with that one, and I'll
Sure.
integrate throughout this presentation.
hmm Yes, so the top challenge is budget and resources, 59%.
Yep.
Then personnel challenges, 51%. Politics, 42%. Communication, 37%. And general leadership challenges, 36%. Those are the top five.
So we said, I'm sorry, 30. So we had budget, personnel, politics,
Communication
communication,
and general leadership
and general
challenges.
leadership. Okay. Thank you
Mhm.
so much for that. And
Sure.
then the percentage of individuals said high, low, medium stress. What does that look like?
Oh, yes. Uh, so most people were in the middle. At a
Okay.
3, we had almost half people feeling that they're at a 3. Um, 27% at a 4. So that's where we had the bulk of folks is between as a 3 and a 4.
A 3 and a 4. Thank you
Hmm.
very much. Okay. I missed a couple of clicks, so if we can go ahead and click forward. Let's just go ahead and click to the next slide. So one of the things that I will say, and Don said that earlier, is any opportunity you all have to network with one another. There's no point in reinventing the wheel, and there's great things that each county have accomplished. And so, how you all can network with one another, it's just so important to ensure that you do so. So, talking about your top challenges, I'll just give you again a little bit about myself as the Assistant County Executive Officer. Um, my board, although supportive for the most part, was a challenge, and that's politics. I had two bosses with different approaches. That was a challenge. Staff getting to know me, given the telework environment, but how large my span of control was a challenge. And it was something that I needed to work on. But also, it's important for you all as leaders to look at where you spend your time. And if you're spending the majority of time in meetings, trying to fix problems, and not a lot of time with your staff, you have to figure out how you can be more effective and efficient with your time. Meeting performance measures in some of the departments was absolutely a challenge, and the workload contributed to some of this. Some departments have more backlog than others. And so, trying to figure out, I felt like my number one role as a leader was to remove barriers for people to get the work done. So, how did I communicate effectively with my board and my CEO to advocate, for budget and resources? Other challenges that I faced was I talked about a critical incident. We had over 200 recommendations. You cannot do 200 recommendations right. And so, the challenge was how do you manage 200 recommendations? But my larger challenge was how could I advocate not to pay attention to 200 recommendations? And that's where the communication and the education came in. Managing emails was an issue. We are on, information overload. So how do we communicate effectively and make the decision on when do we send an email versus pick up the phone and call one another? And do we need to be CC'd on everything? Although we all face very similar challenges, what I'm hoping is that you all love the work. I love the challenge and I love the work. And it's important as a leader to understand, what are your values, what are your strengths, and what is your weakness. So, given all of these challenges, the definition that I have up here of stress is how your brain and your body responds to a challenge or a demand. That's considered stress. Stress is defined as a mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or demanding circumstances. Stress in your body does not distinguish between your professional and personal life. So today, a little over half of you said you were between 3 and 4 in terms of medium stress level. But I will tell you, based on research, leaders often underestimate their level of stress because they feel working through adverse or demanding circumstances is all part of the job. The question is, how does your brain and your body respond to these challenges? How does stress manifest? For example, how well are you all sleeping at night? When you're in meetings, do you participate actively or are you withdrawn? And how does your staff show up? How does it manifest? In times when you are challenged to get the work done based on your performance, do you hammer on yourself? Do you hammer on, on your staff? How do you effectively manage your stress? So I will tell you that during my most stressful period in my career, I remember getting home from work after making a very minor mistake during a board presentation. My husband would ask me what I wanted for dinner. I'd reply, I made too many decisions today, so I'm not going to make any decisions. As I walked away, talking to myself, mumbling, how stupid. My husband asked me, who was I talking to and what did I say? He thought I was talking about him. I replied, I'm talking to myself and I'm talking about myself. I knew I needed to snap out of it. By the way, my bosses were perfectly fine with my presentation. However, I told myself an exaggerated story. I also had to reflect, why did I tell myself, why did I call myself stupid for making a minor mistake? And what was the impact on staff and how was I showing up? Research from global consulting firm Korn Ferry reports that staff considered their boss their primary source of stress. Sometimes as leaders, we are our worst enemy. The way we treat ourselves and the way we treat others, we have to give each other grace. And so when I walked around and I was talking to myself, again, why would I call myself stupid? I just dislike that word, but I did not give myself grace based on the minor mistake that I made during a budget presentation. So for myself, I knew I was in a bad place, but I also had to ask myself when I was preparing for this budget presentation for the board, what stress was I causing my staff as they prepared the document, and how do I show up? Next slide, please. Mastering the art of engaging team members, fostering unity. You can go ahead and click 3 slides, please. And nurturing collaboration isn't just an ethical route, it's a strategic imperative that drives your organizations forward. So when I think about Don, when he started today, that this was not a typical workshop, we spend a lot of time on technical skills and improving how we deliver service. We have to, as leaders, spend an equal amount of time on how we can improve our leadership, because what we know is that engaged employees bring more than just their skills to the table. They bring motivation, efficiency, the willingness to contribute to the organization's vision. Think about how excited you were when you got the job. And think 1 year, 6 months, 3 months later, 3 years later, and I ask you, how are you doing in your leadership role? Do you have the same excitement? And what is it about these roles, given our high level of responsibility and the number of challenges that we face? How do we continue with that excitement? How do we help staff continue with excitement? So when I look at just the overall turnover and retention rate, I talked about the great resignation, but when staff are polled, I don't know too many people when they get a job, everybody says, yes, this is the job that I wanted, or this is a starting point. But if you look at their engagement 6 months later, a year later, you can see a cliff and you can see some of the excitement going down. And part of it is who we are. We want things that are new and shiny, but a larger part of it is what environment are we creating for people that they have this excitement to want to serve others. But when you look at the challenges of budget, politics, personnel issues, that sometimes clouds our excitement. And so, how do we work through it where we are positive and we look for opportunities in all of these challenges? So, there's many definitions of leadership and social and emotional intelligence. Peter Drucker defines leadership as the ability to influence others. John Maxwell says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. If leadership is influence, what is social and emotional intelligence? Daniel Goleman defines social and emotional intelligence as the ability to recognize, understand, and manage your emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of others. So if you just take a second to think about that, how well do you recognize your own emotions and how it impacts other people? Ask yourself, in order to be the best leader you can be, to carry out the mission, vision, and goals of your organization, how well do you influence others? For example, when you sit in a meeting with your colleagues and bosses, do you read the room? Do you pay attention to how people are feeling, how they're doing personally? Do you develop relationships? How do you influence them to move an agenda item along? Or are you silent? Or do you actively engage? Do you all continue to meet about the same subjects over and over and over without resolution? So I'll tell you that the environment that I left, it was male dominated, CEO, CAO, and then we had a public safety, um, we had internal services, and then me, the human services individual. And then we had our public PIO officer. And so it was kind of like Shark Tank in our meetings. And it was because it was at a very high level. And if you looked at the broad topics in terms of public safety, internal services, are they doing enough? Are they not doing enough to support programs? And then you had the human services where everybody thought we were the lovey-dovey people. And so for me, when we'd walk into the room, it was all about how do I gain relationships with people because I know that I need their input and I need their support on particular subjects. And so, it all starts with, how well do I read a room? I had our press officer walk in one day and you can tell she was not the same. So I text her, is everything okay? She texted me back and said, this is the first time someone has asked me that question. And so how do you gain relationships with people? Is through influence and it's through general caring. So again, all about influence. How do you influence others? The second question, what do you need to influence to remove barriers for staff to effectively and efficiently get the job done? How do you remove barriers? Who do you need to influence? And so when we talked about challenges, and I gave an example of I have two bosses, two completely different personalities. I would get one you know, request to do something, and then 20 minutes later, my CEO would have a different way to approach, this. So the question really was, how do I communicate effectively with the two of them? But how do I influence them in a direction where I get them in the room to provide, direction that was similar? Not going to work all the time, but I needed to do it to make sure that I was efficient with my time. And finally, how do you know that you are influencing others in a positive direction? And it's really about the results. So your influence is about a process, but the results is, are you moving the needle in terms of the things that need to happen in order for you to appropriately serve others. Next slide, please. And you can just go ahead and click all the way through to the blue. Okay. So here's social and emotional intelligence, and there are many, many, many disciplines. Today, I'm going to use Goldman's model. Social and emotional intelligence, we already defined it as the ability to understand and manage your own emotions. This is awareness and management of self. The second part is recognizing and influencing the emotions of others. That's social skills. So the most important of all these quadrants that sets the foundation for effective social and emotional intelligence is self-awareness. This is about recognizing and understanding your own emotions. This is how you feel. How you feel will usually determine your behavior, even when we think we are hiding. You have to be able to recognize your own emotions because it usually determines how you show up. Self awareness, like I said, is foundational to all of the other domains. The next one is self management. This involves controlling your emotional reactions and adapting to changing situations. The next quadrant is self awareness, but that's also, I'm sorry, social awareness. That's also called empathy. This quadrant is about sensing and understanding the emotions of others. Maya Angelou said, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I absolutely believe that. And then finally, relationship management. This focuses on handling relationships well and influencing others positively. If you can do this well, everybody wins. Think about your programs and the need to coordinate care. Think about giving or receiving an evaluation and 10 items or exceeds, and one item needs improvement. Most people will forget about the 10 good items and obsess for months over the item that needs improvement. Having a good relationship grounded in respect and feeling that somebody really cares will ease the conversation. Think about it. You guys probably have never received a needs improvement, but have you ever sat in a conference with your staff and talked about all of the things that they did well, and they obsess, or they don't obsess and say, thank you. I know I need this as an area of improvement. It happens sometimes, but most of the time, because default, we tend to focus on the negative. Think about a group picture that you all took. It could be with your family, it could be with your colleagues. You'll grab that picture and you'll look at yourself and you go, "Oh, how many of you all say, ooh, I look wonderful. Matter of fact, I am beautiful in this picture." Most of us will say, oh man, this bun on my head is too big. I need to lose weight. And oh, I wish I would have straightened up my shirt. By default, we focus on the negative. That's why relationships are so important because it helps to ease the conversation. Even when I gave the example of making that minor mistake and beating myself up, that's me being negative because of the standards that we set for ourselves. And even though I had a good relationship with my bosses who said I did a good presentation, that helped a little bit. Matter of fact, it did help when it was all said and done, but I still beat myself up. So when your staff makes mistakes, they beat themselves up. We don't need to hammer on them. Another thing about social and emotional intelligence and why I think it's so important when I think about my own style, I'm very direct, I'm intense, I'm analytical, and I tell you why I go to therapy. And my executive coach, will say, Sayori, dialogue over data. I can get into a room and get into a meeting, and there will be 1,000 data elements. I will pick out one and see a problem with it. instead of starting off with positive, all the positives that happen. And so, with that intensity and that judginess about data, I understand how intimidating and at times demoralizing it could be for staff. And so, knowing that about myself, I know that I have to go out of my way to establish relationships. So, in my mind, I'm the nicest person in this world. But then I get feedback to say, hey, and I say, hey, why didn't anybody speak up in the meeting? And they'll say, you know, say, or you're intimidating. And so I have to continue to give myself a reminder, and it's really about being socially aware about myself and my feelings. So my feelings are my preferences, the things that challenge and trigger me, and data is one of them. And I show up thinking that I am hiding, that, hey, some of these folks are not prepared in this meeting, and I have to do stuff like give myself a 20-minute rule that I don't talk, but I have to pay attention to my body language, and where I'm thinking I'm hiding it, it's not the case. I think it's so important with self awareness, and I will give you all this stat throughout this day. When when taking a poll about self awareness, 90 to 95% of people believe that they are self aware, but only 15% actually are. Again, it's really about, do you know how you feel about certain things and how you show up? And most people will say that they're self aware. Next slide, please. Okay, why is social and emotional intelligence so important? If you click 3 times, yep, one more time. Thank you. If you look at the scale, um, when we hire lower level staff, they are required to do the actual work. And so technical skills are important at the lower levels. But the higher you go up in leadership, the less technical skills you're required to have, and the more social, emotional intelligence skills you're required to have. Because at this level and at your leadership levels, it's really about how you positively influence others to get the work done with the understanding that you should not be doing the work. I know we have different levels of leadership on this Zoom meeting today. Some of you are still doing casework. Your number one responsibility should be mentoring and coaching staff. And so technically, yes, you staff these cases, and some of you, given your workload and the lack of staffing, are having to actually go in there and work these cases. But for the most part, you should not be doing casework, and you should be providing leadership to your staff, and coaching and mentoring. Next slide, please. Okay. Why is social and emotional intelligence so important? It helps work through challenges, and you just talked about challenges. 75% of leaders' careers are derailed because of the lack of emotional intelligence. Think about this. Do you guys agree with this stat? I think it's a pretty high percentage, but based on my experience, again, at the higher levels, if you are not required to do the technical work, then why are people's careers being derailed? And I do believe, in my experience, and also based on research, that the 75% of leaders' careers are derailed because of the lack of emotional intelligence. Um, Doing social and emotional intelligence well prevents burnout and contributes to the healthy environment. And the reason for that, again, is what I just said is, hey, I made a mistake. I beat up on myself. As you face these challenges, how do you center your brain? How do you understand the priorities and the important things that need to happen, like sleep? Sleep, the lack of sleep is telling you that something is going on in your life that needs to change. Now, don't get me wrong, when I worked, sleep is the one thing that I needed to do a better job of mastering when I face challenges. And so, there are several techniques in terms of getting up, journaling, what does mindfulness look like? But it really is an indication, and there are several indications that will help you prevent burnout and contribute to a healthier environment. Next slides, please. If you go ahead and click forward 4 times, it is important how you show up. Leaders' emotions create a disproportionate impact. Think about when your bosses walk in the room, happy, mad, positive, negative. The boss sets the tone. Research shows that even when bosses are not talking, employees look for nonverbal cues of satisfaction or dissatisfaction. So think about it. You all are in the meeting, your CEO, a board member, it could be your director walks into the room and gives you this bad budget information. Everybody looks to the leader. So even though we don't think that our staff are paying attention, know that they do, and they look for your cues, and you set the tone for the environment in which you work. During the times of VUCA, and I'll spell this out in a later slide, leaders look staff look to you for leadership, and I'll talk more about that. Okay, social and emotional intelligence builds highly effective teams. So if you worked on an island and you didn't have any staff and there was some conflict, you really you don't need to worry about it as much. But anytime you work on a team, you all think about how wonderfully diverse we are and think about the different approaches to how work can get done. You know that it is extremely important to pay attention to the cues in the room, the emotions, the relationships, how we manage ourselves. It cannot not exist in a team environment because conflict is inevitable. And then I said it earlier, self-awareness is foundational to all the domains. However, so what I said was, when surveyed, 90% believe that they are self-aware, and over 15% people are actually not. So how do you improve your self-awareness and who you are as a leader? I'm hoping that you all, at one time in your career, gets the opportunity to do a 360 evaluation. This is where staff, your colleagues, your bosses evaluate your effectiveness of a leader. It's tough for some folks. And matter of fact, it's tough for all of us because sometimes we just don't want to hear bad things about ourselves. Throughout my career, my 360 has been very consistent. Sayori is very intense. Sayori is analytical. It's the things that I talked about. Sayori is intimidating. And then I think one of the most important ones was that I'm not always available. And so the question is how can I be available for staff, but how can I be present? So let's say during a performance meeting or just an individual conference, you know, put the phone down, Sayori. Don't look at your emails. Be present with the individual. And it's something that I constantly needed to work on based on the number of things. And that is so fundamentally basic and the easiest thing to work on. So any opportunity you can get to do a 360, um, I think it's important. Feedback, feedback, feedback. Even at my level as the assistant CEO, I would seek feedback from my CEO and my CAO. And the reason for that is they hired me to work through relationships when standing up that integrated services delivery system. But I understood my body language is so strong and intense. So when I knew I was getting into, going to a meeting where folks were not always the easiest to work with, it's my body language that I needed to pay attention to. And so after those, high stakes, intense meetings, I would go to my bosses and ask them, what did I need to do better, not only in my interaction, but my body language? And so for me, it was just a consistent work in progress. And then finally, what has worked in terms of improving my social and emotional intelligence was finding a mentor, somebody that can give you feedback on the spot, but also an executive coach. And until the end of my career, I would see a coach, not only for my own mental health, but again, the goal was to show up and be a better leader. So we would walk, I would go, and sometimes it would feel like a therapy session. Next slide. Okay, so I feel like I've done a lot of talking, and these are so many concepts, but I promise you we will get to a couple of exercises. And so, another concept. When we look at the whole person, okay, we start with IQ, and we usually hire people based on their IQ. That's anytime testing is done. So IQ stands for intelligence quotient. It measures your cognitive abilities like logic, reasoning, problem solving, and memory. Think of it in terms of traditional, academics. For example, your ability to test well. And so, why I bring this up is a lot, if we look at our leadership makeup, some of us have promoted into leadership classifications based on how well we were as a caseworker, getting the technical work done. And it's so important that as you move up in the organization, you spend time working on your leadership competencies, because it's not enough, like I just said, and I'm going to keep hammering this, your IQ. I'm going to assume that everybody has the baseline IQ, but it's important that you work on your leadership. We talked about the technical term for emotional intelligence, which is EQ. That's emotional quotient. So when we see social and emotional intelligence or just emotional intelligence, it's not called EI, it's called EQ, because they line it up with IQ. That's the intelligence quotient. Okay, personality describes your consistent patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Example, being an extrovert, do you gain energy from within? Or an extrovert, do you gain energy from others? So for me, I'm an introvert. When I get home from work, I don't answer my phone. When I go to conferences, I'm the wallflower in the corner, and people will go, they don't believe that in me. Because I gain my energy from within. I wish I had an outgoing personality where I see people work that room. I've had to adapt given my level of responsibility, but it is not my preference. So personality is a preference that we're born with. Some people are thinkers, some people are feelers. I am a thinker, and I have to work. And it's not that I don't have a feeling bone in my body, but my preference is to think first, then feel. Think of personality as your style of being. You can be smart and emotionally skilled, but your personality determines your preferences. Personality and IQ are hardwired. So even though I have to adapt in a room, my preference, my number one thought is go stand in the corner. And then I have to say, hey, step out of Sayori, there goes your colleagues. Go over there and have a conversation with them. So personality, IQ, hardwired. The great thing is that emotional intelligence can be learned and changed as we commit to do the work. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of concepts. So let me show you how this plays out. So bear with me on this example. And I have to give a disclaimer. As I give this example, I am loyal to my bosses because they hired me, and I try my hardest to be positive. So this example may appear to be a negative, but it is a true story. Okay. I had a previous boss. I'm sorry, can we click through just one time? I think there's an org chart right there. Okay. I had a previous boss many moons ago. She was absolutely brilliant. She hired me to take her old position in which she had an intimate relationship with the staff I was now responsible for. One day, the legislative analyst emailed me and my boss and asked the county to put together a document consisting of data, funding, and the effectiveness of a particular program. So my boss went straight to the manager of the team and they worked on a concept of an analysis. And she later told me to review it and submit it. So here we have my boss go straight to my staff, asked them to put together this analysis, and she asked me to review it. When I received it, it made absolutely no sense. Okay, so imagine that. So I asked to meet with my boss, and in a very nice and politically correct way, I let her know that the document did not make any sense. She laughed at me and said, leave it up to the PhDs and asked me to submit it anyway. A couple of days later, the legislative office called me and said she could not understand the document and she wanted me to explain it to her. I go into my boss's office and I explained that what the legislator said in terms of her lack of understanding of the document. My boss said she was a dummy. And she asked me to go back to staff, that she was done with the situation and to rewrite the document. I rewrote the document along with staff to coach them, and then I resubmitted it. I was bothered with this conversation with my boss, so I scheduled a meeting to meet with her. I explained that I was offended by her comments and that if she wanted a different deputy director in this position, I would respectfully step down. She laughed at me and stated she did not realize that I was so sensitive and that she hired me because she knew I could do the job. Think about the scenario. What came into play? Was this IQ, personality, or EQ? Did my boss have the right to go to staff? Absolutely, she had the right to go to staff. It's her staff. Did my boss have the responsibility to take my feedback into account? It depends on how you interpret that. There are going to be many of times that you all provide feedback and your feedback is not taken into account. Was I being overly sensitive about the PhD comment? And should I readjust my thinking? Was I right or was she wrong? I think these are basic situations that we work through on a daily basis. Some of you all are going to say, no, Sayori, this is not a normal situation. So I would be curious in hearing your initial thoughts. Do you have any employees that you go, this is just her personality? Do you have any bosses? Do people talk about me in my intensity and my directness to say that's just her personality? Is it personality or is it EQ? And so I'm curious. Give me some thoughts in your chat, and Megan and Don, help me if anybody has anything to say about this.
So far, the chat's pretty quiet.
Oh my gosh, why are we so I get nervous with quietness. What are your thoughts?
Okay, we've got a comment. It's hard to sometimes differentiate between EQ and personality, and a couple of folks thinking that it's EQ.
Yep.
Oh,
So,
someone thinking it feeling like it's personality.
yep. So I think it's a combination of all, right? So my boss's personality very similar to mine's very intense and analytical. Now, she has preferences in terms of how she likes to present and see information. And some of us do, right? But emotional intelligence for me is really understanding I have to, as an individual, have to understand my feelings. Okay, so what are my feelings? What are my emotions when she doesn't take my input into account? Well, I know that she has a preference in the way she does the work. But her emotional intelligence is understanding not only her own feelings, and even if her feelings was, hey, I don't care what Sayori's feedback was, I am a data research expert and I'm going to submit what I consider to be a high level document. Now, the lack of emotional intelligence is understanding how I am being impacted by the way the information is being presented to me. So if you had a staff member, and we ask for people's input all of the time, right? Don't we? We do surveys. We sit in meetings and we want people's input. And there are times when input is not going to be taken into account. So my emotional intelligence would be, what am I feeling about the information that I'm receiving? But also, how am I communicating back to the individual of why I'm not taking the information into account, right? So personality is different than emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence is really understanding what are my feelings and how do I impact others? How do I develop relationships? But personality comes into play. But just because, for example, I'm an introvert versus an extrovert does not mean that I lack emotional intelligence. Does that make sense to everybody?
Sayori, there's some more in the chat. The group's getting warmed up.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
There's one comment. I do have staff that have very distinct personalities, and sometimes it may also be they have low EQ and are not willing to grow in that area. There also has to be a clear line that either she or you does not cross in any interaction. A thought that rapport gets in the way of EQ. It's hard to toe the line between friendly banter and professional direction.
Yep.
uh, a combination of IQ and personality. Sometimes bosses hire staff that they see similar to them, but that not be the case. A question, is her way the only way? Comment, I think personality is your instinct to present a certain way, and EQ is your willingness to adjust that after hearing that someone is asking you to please adjust to suit them, the culture, or the team.
Yep.
And a comment that personally, I think that if my boss were to speak with me the way that she spoke with you and how she dealt with that situation, she would be given the opportunity to seek her fortunes elsewhere. Uh, Final comment. This is important in creating a work environment of psychological safety and staff's willingness to give input and feedback.
Absolutely. I think all of these comments are valid. And so I wanted to just set up this example to foundationally walk through what this would look like. So for me, as the receiver of information from a boss, how do I manage myself? And so for me, social and emotional intelligence starts with how do I manage my own emotions? And then for the person who said, hey, if a boss talked to me like that, I would be seeking elsewhere. And sometimes those are decisions that have to be made. But there is a process that we go through in terms of our own sanity. Um, and we have to, again, be very clear about our values. So if I asked you all what your leadership values are, would you know them? So for me, what's important is respect, accountability, um, a big sense of community. I grew up in a very poor neighborhood, but my parents taught me what community really looked like and how we can improve outcomes based on our poor community, based on what we gave to one another in our community. We relied on social services. However, it was really getting together as a community and doing service to one another that really made the difference in terms of our overall success. And so, know as a leader, what your values are, know your strengths, and also know your weaknesses. And as we go through this workshop, I'll give some examples of why you're always going to come back to those three questions. Next slide, please.
Sayori, we've got a raised hand from Thomas. What that looks
Th-
like maybe a question.
I
Thank
just
you.
want to I just want to speak to that. You mentioned before from your background, Sayori, that you were kind of old school and you're kind of used to doing things a certain way. For me personally, too, coming to this environment from where I came from, I'm former law enforcement and I'm former military. You come from a perspective where it is pretty much you just do your job and just do your thing, and having to come into a perspective where you have to be more aware of people's feelings, their abilities, their emotional situation.
Yep.
You can't just blindly go over everything the same way we did it before. We really have to give each other the benefit of the doubt, so to speak, and that respect. And for me personally, I mean, I'm not old, but I feel old sometimes. Is it's that's hard. That's hard transitioning and reconciling. That's almost like two halves of my personality because I'm so used to there is that part of me that's just like suck it up, buttercup, let's get the work done, whatever. But at the same time, you have to have that ability to say, and everybody, if you're burned out, if I'm burned out, I know everybody else is burned out. My
Yep.
team, and I deal with that on a regular basis. It's a constant, almost fight or flight, constantly. And my team gets burnt out so I have to be able to adjust that. So yeah, I just got to say that.
No, and I do appreciate that comment, and I don't think you stand alone on it because it's difficult. And first of all, to manage an organization, so again, during COVID, people wanted flexibility. We realized, flexibility could happen, but we also saw deficits where part of the community was not being served. And so my whole thing is all that I do, I put, the people that we serve in the center and it impacts all of our decisions. But I've also seen on the other side where there have been situations where em- employees could telework, but we had bosses that they just didn't trust the workforce. And so I felt like if you can evaluate people in the work and they can do the work and not be in the office, we have the responsibility to be flexible, but um, every situation is different. But I do appreciate, that comment because I knew that I needed to change my approach because first of all, I just find it amazing that folks leave work and you just wonder who can just quit a job and go get another job. And that's not how I grew up. There was a loyalty to the organization. But I also know that based on all of our research, people don't quit jobs, they quit the environment that they work in. And it's really about how do you find this happy medium and put some of your own how you did business in the past aside, as long as you're not compromising your standards. And so I do appreciate that comment. I'm hoping as we go through this workshop, we can get a little more clarity of what that looks like and what some of our feelings are. Okay. So, looking at the definition of emotions, a complex state of feeling that results in physical and physiological changes that influence thoughts and behaviors. Such feelings include physiological arousal, conscious experiences, and behavioral expressions. So, if you can click through the slide, please. Yep, that slide is a good one. Go two more and then stop, one more and stop there. Okay. Okay, so if we look at the event up top, trigger, emotions start in the brain. When we experience something, an event, a situation, a trigger, our brain processes that input in an area called the amygdala. It is necessary for survival. This tiny part of the brain plays a big role in detecting threats or rewards. Once it senses something important, it sends signals to other parts of the brain and the body. Your brain and your body work together to prepare you for action. Our past experience, beliefs, and cultural backgrounds all play a role in terms of what triggers us. I think the most important thing to understand in terms of triggers is that there are certain things that trigger you that may not trigger someone else. And so Thomas talked about coming from a law enforcement background, and he and I seem very similar. So our initial thought was, hey, folks need to come to work and do their job, come to work, matter of fact, on time, and do your job and do your job well. For some people, they'll say, hey, I don't care when people show up as long as they get the work done. Some people come to work to meetings. That was my pet peeve, particularly in this, virtual environment. I wanted these meetings to start on time because I just thought it was important in terms of the value of my time and other people's time. Where some people just say, "Hey, you know what? I'm 10 minutes late for a meeting. It's not a big deal." So you all have to look at what are some of the things that trigger a strong reaction from yourself, because that's going to show how you show up or going to tell how you show up. So once, this event, this triggering event happens, this is what happens in your body. As a result of your triggers, your body will experience default physiological responses. Your body is preparing to fight, flight, flee, or fawn, and it's very hard to control. Have you ever felt your heart race when you were angry? So, for example, when my boss called the legislator a dummy, for some reason that really bothered me, and my heart began to race. I thought it was disrespectful. Have you ever been nervous at the beginning of a presentation and felt and heard your voice crack, hand shake, or your heart start to race? Or unconsciously roll your eyes when irritated during a meeting when something or someone got on your nerves? That's emotions in action, powerful, invisible, forces shaping how we feel, think, and behave. So when I think about these physiological responses, again, in the beginning of time, this is how we communicated. So when we talk about this fight, flight, flee, or fawn, you're in a situation and it's a dangerous situation. Your body is going to react because it's preparing itself for, again, flight, flee, fawn, fight. And it is hard to control, but you have to think about how you show up in meetings. And if there is something that triggers you, you think you may be hiding how you are feeling. But remember, leaders create a disproportionate impact. So you as a leader can say one thing, and your staff can say the same exact thing, but your impact is going to be greater. So if your staff ever feel like staff can get in a meeting and you guys can be talking about a policy and how it was implemented, staff can say it one way, and it's excused, but you as the leader have to really pay attention to how you're showing up because you just can't take stuff back. Okay, so this is our body. It reacts. Our brain kicks into high gear, attempting to make sense of these physiological changes and the triggering event. The cognitive interpretation stage is where we assign meaning to our experiences and label the emotions we're feeling. Our past experience, beliefs, and cultural backgrounds all play a role in how we interpret and label our emotions. This stage is particularly important because it's where we have the most potential for influencing our emotional experiences. By challenging our interpretations and reframing our thoughts, we can potentially alter the course of our emotional responses. So I gave the example this morning, the triggering event, my computer shut down 4 times this morning. I could feel myself hands start to shake because I was going to be pretty embarrassed, but also um, really cared that I was going to leave the academy and you all hanging if I could not get logged on. So I'm paying attention to my hands start to shake. I'm trying not to panic. Then I had come into awareness. Well, how are you feeling? Well, I'm feeling nervous because I don't want to let people down. Then we have this quick second in time to allow us to get our brain centered to determine are we going to react or respond. And so that's really what it looks like, and it happens on a daily basis. And so I hear people all of the time during that awareness phase, they're trying to figure it out, and they'll say, Sayori, this employee made me so mad. I started seeing stars. I knew that employee, that supervisor, manager's brain was offline, and I was afraid to what I was going to hear next. Next thing I know, I'm getting a HR complaint that this person is harassing this employee based on how the manager responded. When you have a situation in which you receive an email that offended you, I tell people to step away from the keyboard. You have the opportunity in this time to come up with a response that is not a reaction. Matter of fact, if the situation is so difficult, have somebody review the email. That's the easiest one because you don't have to respond immediately. But some people, they just can't help themselves. They're on that keyboard responding and then they regret what they write and it gets them in trouble. In the car, when somebody cuts you off, you start to have an automatic physiological response. Your awareness, you're angry. So what do? Is it a reaction? Do you flip people off? Do you cuss them out? What happens in that particular time? I see this the most during presentations. When people are nervous about presentations, and if you look at all polls, the number one fear is doing a public speech. That physiological response is difficult to control. So you see the paper start to shake. You need to know what your physiological response is. So if you know that your paper is going to shake, then you put your paper down for all presentations. If there's a podium up there, put your paper on the podium. If there's not a podium, then you need to ask for a podium, but you have to know your responses. So your awareness is fear. What does this fear look like? Your brain goes into a fog, and if you don't have the paper in front of you, you lose your spot. So then you react to questions. Your brain is not clear. So the question really is, how do you get your brain online in order to appropriately respond during these presentations? And so that time, There's a lot of research that says, this deep breathing is so important. And it's funny because I laugh, because what does deep breathing look like when you're doing a board presentation? Okay, let me get my brain, online, let me breathe. That there are quiet ways that you can breathe, but preparation, is the key, and constant practice as it relates to presentations. Okay, so what does this look like in action? I'm sorry, on this slide, I think it says fire Sayori. I was going to give you an example of what this looked like. So every Tuesday for probably 2 years straight before I retired, there was a constituent that would show up to the board meetings and talk about how incompetent the department was, one of the departments I was responsible for, and I needed to be fired along with staff. But for time purposes, I'm going to go back to the example of the legislative person to show you what this looks like. Okay. The legislative staff calls. So, let's say that you guys were in your role as deputy or whatever the position is, and Sacramento calls, and they want you to put together a white paper. Is that a trigger for you? For me, it wasn't a trigger based on my experience, but again, everybody's triggers are different. So sometimes, for example, when the board calls, they go scrambling. And I've seen people make bad decisions based on being nervous of regarding who called them. Boss goes directly to staff. So if you have a boss who breaks the chain of command, keeps you out of the assignment, it goes straight to staff, is it a trigger for you? For me, it just was not a trigger. It would have become a trigger if there was a situation where I was evaluating the staff and I needed to provide them with feedback, and let's say I was performance managing them. I have an open door policy, but I understand the trigger about the chain of command, because when staff would go to me, some of my directors would feel undermined about the staff coming to me to file a complaint or whatever the situation was. Boss calls legislative person a dummy. That was absolutely a trigger for me, because I just thought it was disrespectful. But when I thought about it, my whole thing is, I'm telling my boss that this document does not make sense. Okay, well, she called the legislative staff a dummy. Was she calling me a dummy also because I'm saying the document doesn't make sense? I just thought it was disrespectful. Not taking my input, not a trigger alone, because there's just going to be times when the boss makes the decision or someone else, and my input is not going to be taken. Um, but if you couple that with the PhD conversation, uh, there was no trigger about not having a PhD. I'm like, do I just have a master's? Is that not good enough? No, it was the way it was said that caused me to be triggered. Okay, so my automatic physiological response based on these triggers is, shoot, my heart started to race. I don't know if I rolled my eyes, because I think I do a better job with that, based on just working on it throughout the years. So my process, I labeled it, I was angry. But then I had to ask myself, on a scale of 1 to 10, how angry was I? Well, I was a 7. And I'm thinking about the comment in the chat where somebody said, hey, if I had a boss that talked to me like that, it would be time for me to move on. In this situation, I just gave it a 7 in terms of my level, is because, surprisingly enough, she and I had a relationship with each other, and we worked with each other for several years, and I knew her heart, even though it wasn't the right way to communicate. So I had to ask myself, why am I angry, and how do I reframe this interaction? This is that was just the opportunity to get my brain online. And so for the reason why I'm going through these steps is you all have different situations at work and different triggering events. The question is, do you know your physiological response? Are you aware of your emotion and how you show up? And do you take the time to do the work ahead of time, knowing the issues that you're faced with? So the final step was my behavioral expression, a reaction or response. Well, there was no reaction from me. The response was I was going to go back to staff so I can coach and mentor them on how to put together a document using Turner language. And so for my budget team and my research team and IT, I always have to tell them speak English, and that anybody should be able to pick up a document and know exactly what it is that you're talking about. Internal language is speaking eighth grade level. I know that's difficult for some people given their discipline, but you know, it is what it is. So what was important and what was able, how I'm been able just to stay grounded, like I said earlier, is to know my values, strengths, and weaknesses. So how do you know that they're in alignment? Well, when the legislator called and said, I don't understand, I could have said, that's what I told my boss, but she didn't listen. But I understood that negativity or throwing someone under the bus does not align with my values. When my boss laughed at me, I could have lashed out, but I know my strengths. Then I had to just ask myself, was I telling myself a story when I felt that she laughed? Do you give people the benefit of the doubt? And again, every situation is different. For me, I just want you all to understand in these situations how you show up and how you process information in order to keep your brain so clear that you're able to make good decisions. Does that make sense to everybody?
Sayori, this is Dawn. I'm jumping in with a time check. We've got about 10 minutes until we get to Q&A.
Okay. Okay, 10 minutes. Ooh, shush, shush, shush. Okay. If we only have 10 minutes for a Q&A, I'm going to take us to this scarf model and I'm going to move through these slides. I'll talk about them in the scarf model. Yes, okay. So click through, please. Keep going. Okay, so you all, I absolutely love this model. And for me, the scarf model, it really helps you, given everybody is different in terms of what triggers them. But the scarf model was introduced by neuroscience David Rock. It outlines 5 key domains that influences our behavior in social situations. SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So if you guys, I'm not sure if you received the PowerPoint presentation, but if you have a piece of paper in front of you, can you write down status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness? There are 5 key domains that drive our social experience as a threat or a reward. Remember, every social situation, we go into fight, flight, flee, fawn, and there are certain things in the workplace that we may take for granted. These 5 things are just basic and fundamental to every organization. And you, as a leader, should know that there are basic things that impact the morale and the environment of not only yourself, but your employees. Okay, so starting with status. This is about our status, relative importance to others. If we feel respected and recognized, we thrive. So examples, performance evaluations. This may impact a person's status. That one below standards, like I said, people will obsess off of. The chain of command, you hired me as a supervisor, but this person continues to usurp my authority. Appointing an in charge. I've been here longer. You came in as a new boss and now you're choosing someone else. That this impacts my status. I get complaints about this. Employees feel like they don't always get credit for their ideals. So I think status is just an interesting concept. And the reason for that is most of you all on this call will say you don't need reward and recognition for the good work that you do. Do you think that is a true statement or a false statement? Some of us are just so shy. We don't want to be acknowledged. For me, for years, I would tell my boss during my performance evaluation or individual conferences, I know what I do well, but tell me some of the things that I need to do to improve in order to appropriately serve the department. Status is something that we take for granted, but when individuals feel like their relative importance is minimized within an organization, they will feel threatened. That's status. Okay. Anything in the chat about that one?
Yes, perfect timing. We've got a comment that, in my experience, all staff want to be acknowledged. However, there are many staff who want that acknowledged to be very private in a one-to-one space. However, I've not encountered a staff who did not want to be seen in their well-performing moments.
Well, thank you for that. And so that is a great response. So thank you. Okay, certainty. Our brains love predictability. When we know what's coming, we feel safe and focused. On the other hand, uncertainty can trigger anxiety and reduce performance. Some examples that I see today. We restructure and we shift managers and supervisors often. New boss, new job. So I find it amazing that your performance standards have been the same since the beginning of time in terms of your investigations, what you're required to do. But anytime you get a new boss, there is a new style of communication and how that work should be accomplished. And so we got to make sure that as we shift people and people get new bosses, that we are very clear about expectations and communication because people are uncertain every time they get a new boss. And sometimes it's just underestimated. What I'm hearing a lot about today is given just the overall political environment that there are going to be changes to the budget funding structure. So this budget has caused a level of uncertainty. And again, in your programs, you share it with another program, children shares the lion's share of the budget, and decisions have to be made about what this budget is going to look like, and uncertainty just causes people to feel threatened and uncomfortable. Anytime you implement any major change, a new service delivery model, a new computer system, I'm not sure if this is going to work or if I can produce. That's what employees say. If you look at any time you produce something new, productivity goes down in the first couple of months. It's kind of like just your overall what change management looks like. And I'll just give a very basic example. So I have this chase in my room, and it's been here for years. And I decided to change my bedroom around. And so I moved the chase on the side of this door. So I jump up every morning, run to the bathroom, probably for the first 5 days, because that chase has been here for 20 years. I've run into this chase. It took me a couple of weeks to figure out not to run into this chase. That is such a low level example, but that's what change looks like. We are creatures of habit. So, the more things change, the more they stay the same. We have to bump our heads a couple of times until we figure it out. And so, anytime people are uncertain, productivity is going to go down and people are threatened. Autonomy. This refers to our sense of control over our environment and decisions. Even small choices can make a big difference in how we empower staff. So, the biggest example of autonomy is micromanagement. It's funny because supervisors, managers, and directors will say they do not want to be micromanaged, but they micromanage their staff. Micromanagement shows up in so many different ways, and some staff have to be micromanaged given their performance. And so, people want the control to be able to control their own destiny, and there are opportunities in the workplace, but it's hard for some of us to give up some control to staff. Relatedness. We all are social creatures. Feeling connected and included makes us more open and collaborative. Feeling excluded has the opposite effect. It's that whole friend or foe. So, anytime you're working in a team environment, it's important that you ensure that your staff feel like they are part of the team and understand where they fit. So, that's the R. And the final thing is fairness. Finally, fairness is about just equitable, or we perceive a situation to be. A sense of fairness builds trust. A lack of it can quickly lead to conflict or disengagement. So I hear this all the time. When people don't get a promotion, for some reason, they feel that by not getting that promotion, has to do with favoritism, uh, inequity, um, and what conversations are we having with folks regarding promotion? Do you have staff that go on interviews all the time? Do we do any follow up? We usually leave it up to the employee to follow up. And then I have some managers and directors say, Sayori, the same people show up on the list every time interviews take place. Um, it's a demoralizer for people, and it stings when you don't get a particular job. But what conversations are we having with our staff, because we need them to be engaged? Um, if you guys are new into your positions and you stepped into a role, like for myself, I grew up in an organization. After 35 years, I'm going to have some friends. I had to separate my personal from my professional life. So then the question became, hey, am I showing favoritism to my friends because I go to lunch and people saw us? And so you got to make sure that there's a clear line. And so these are the things you all, if you can minimize how people feel in these 5 categories, you will have a more engaged workplace. And again, the whole point is that we are all triggered differently. Okay, with that said, next slide. How much time, Don?
We've got 1 minute before we move into a break and question and answer.
Okay, so someone didn't get a promotion, thought they deserved a job. What would you say that is? Fairness, that's F. Status, that's a good one. That's correct. Budget cuts. Certainty, correct. Feel micromanaged. Autonomy. New boss. Certainty. New service delivery model. Certainty. Employees go right to boss based on the open door policy. Status. Relatedness. Nothing in common with team members. Relatedness. Bosses goes to lunch with colleagues because they are friends. Fairness. Relatedness. Organization is restructuring. Certainty. Okay, with that said, again, I just want to take this time to thank you all for sharpening your leadership saw. When I think about your programs, the biggest quote that I think about is no, necessity is the mother of innovation or invention. You all, out of necessity, based on your mandates and your limited resources, you all have innovated more than any other program that I know. And this is where I started, that folks can learn from you. And it's so important as we think about social and emotional intelligence. We talked a little bit about self awareness, but when I think about relationships that you all are required to connect with, given your program's necessity in order to meet the needs of the constituents that you serve, it's absolutely imperative. It is not an option that you develop relationships with your colleagues in other departments because you know that all of the needs are not met in your program. So with that said, I just want to thank you for your time. I do apologize for the technical difficulty in not being able to get through all of these slides.